Hello, and welcome to Law Talk. My name is John Celebrezze, and I'm the co-founder of the Celebrezze-Zangi Community Legal Education Project, as we call it, CZ-CLEP for short. Our organization provides continuing education about the judiciary and legislature to attorneys, judges, government officials, and the general public. As a career educator, I recognize early on how important legal matters are and how they impact our lives. I am the nephew of the late Anthony J. Celebrezze, who was the popular 5-term mayor of Cleveland and a member of President Kennedy's cabinets. As a tribute to his lifetime commitment to the legal process, we dedicate this show.
John's special guest today is Attorney Andrea L. Ware. Andrea earned her Bachelor of Arts from Kent State University in 1996, majoring in both pre-medicine and psychology. She went on to earn her Juris Doctorate from Case Western University in 2001. She began her legal practice in Cleveland, Ohio, in a small personal injury firm before opening her own law practice in 2004. Let's join John and his special guest, Andrea L. Ware.
Andrea, welcome to Law Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Well, we're real happy to have you here. I was thinking about you the other day, knowing that you were going to be my guest, and time does have a way of sliding by. How many years have you been practicing law?
It has been 11 and a half years already.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's gone quickly, that's for sure.
I guess it has. I mean, until I actually thought about it, I remember when she just started to open her practice, but apparently it's been a while. It's
been a while. I started in Cleveland for the first couple years, but after I had my first child, I live in Medina County, actually in Valley City, and I decided it was time to make my business where my home was, and so everything's been in Medina since about 2004.
Which is a perfect segue into what I want my viewers to be aware of. Something really big has happened in your practice lately, hasn't it?
Absolutely. In January, I went out on my own, and I bought a building actually in Medina where I opened my law office right on Court Street.
Well, that's great. That's great. And I did have the pleasure of viewing that building, and I was the son of the carpenter here. I was very, very impressed with how you've restored it. It's an older building. It's right on Court Street, right by the car wash, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Right by the corner of Union and Court Street.
So you have your own digs now.
I do. It's wonderful. It's been quite a process getting everything up and running and all of the things we needed together, but it's a good flow now. Everything's where it needs to be. Just great digs in general.
Great. That's great. And in there you have your capable assistant, Sunny, who still works with you.
Absolutely. She's wonderful. Okay. She is definitely my right hand.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, every time I go there, she always greets me, and I'm happy to visit with her. Well, let's get down to brass tacks. One of your favorite topics, and a topic that we visited on Law Talk on more than one occasion, family law. I think that's an area of law that I won't necessarily say is always the most pleasurable part. I mean, there are aspects of it are difficult, but it is also shall we say, there's a great need for good family lawyers, to what I know you are. I guess I've had other lawyers talk about this over the years we've been on here, but I think a person that we would both know on this topic is Judge Mary Kovac.
Yes, our Medina County domestic relations judge.
She did a show with me a couple of years ago. Do you practice in front of Judge Kovac?
Primarily, actually. I do all of the surrounding counties, but most of my practice is in Medina County in front of our Judge Kovac.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. Well, no place like the obvious, so I'm just going to give you I got my trusty Cliff Bar here. My first question, what is family law?
Family law is kind of a broad and encompassing term, in my opinion, for divorce, dissolution, custody, anything that revolves the family and the dynamics and how to take care of the family through the court system.
I see. So, not always the most pleasant thing to talk about, but reality for sure. If we talk about a marriage, whether it was done before a justice of the peace, the mayor of Wadsworth, Judge Kimbler, or in a church, it's a contract. I mean,
It is.
Okay.
It's a number of things, but in the legal world, it basically is a contract,
Okay.
yes.
All right, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Which,
That's a very true statement.
yeah, I mean, that's the reality. That's the world we live in. So we have to talk about how do we dissolve or terminate a marriage. And this is a big aspect of family law that you practice, correct?
Absolutely.
Well,
Primarily, termination of a marriage can be accomplished through generally divorce or dissolution. They both do the same thing. They terminate the marriage in the end. They're basically two different ways to get there.
I see.
For some people, it is enough to sit down with their soon-to-be ex-spouse and divide everything up. They have to be able to come to an agreement on what to do with the kids, how to support the kids and their spouse to the extent that's applicable. They have to be able to divvy up all of the assets and also the liabilities. You have to be able to agree on everything necessary to move on, or you can't have a dissolution. That is generally the hitch for a dissolution.
Okay. All right, but of the two, Andrea, divorce or dissolution, I hate to use the word easiest, but I can't think of a better word right now. The easier way to go, which would you say?
Well, the easier way would be a dissolution, but it's only easier if you have a partner that's willing to sit down and work it out.
Okay, I sort of was a leading question because I knew you would answer it that way. If you have two people that are getting along with each other very well, then generally people don't find themselves in a need to hire a family lawyer. So
well, I wouldn't agree with that statement. Law is complicated. The fact that you and your spouse can come to an agreement doesn't necessarily mean that it's in your best interest. You have to know what you're entitled to know whether or not that agreement's fair.
Okay.
Because one of the hallmarks of a dissolution is that it's fair, just, and equitable. It's got to be right for the family, not just your agreement. The courts review dissolutions to ensure that they're fair, just, and equitable. Okay. So it's not enough to just sit down and make an agreement. It has to have those key pieces to it.
Okay, so here's where we need the guidance of the lawyer to make sure both parties or one party?
Well, a lawyer can only represent one of the parties. While generally people are able to have the one attorney draw up the paperwork and both parties use it, in the end, that attorney that draws up the paperwork only represents one person, not both.
I see. Well, okay. You mentioned children. When we get into that, well, it leads me to my next question. How is child custody and visitation established? I mean, we're not going to have the traditional home anymore. I think dad's going to live someplace, mom's going to live someplace, the kids are going to have to go somewhere.
Generally speaking, if you're talking dissolution, the parties are going to decide how to care for the children, which means that they may be sharing the time by the kids going to mom's house for a certain period and dad's house for a different period, whatever works best for the kids. Parties that work together focus on what is going to keep the kids in the most stable position. And for some families, that's spending a week at dad's house so the kids always know where they're going to be for that week, and then a week at mom's house because the kids always know where they're going to be for that week. But each family unit's different, and parties that work together just strive to establish something that the children feel comfortable with.
Okay. All right. Well,
I would like to add, if I may,
go ahead.
when we're talking about a divorce case, though, it can be somewhat different. Well, ultimately, the goal is the children's best interest. When we're talking about a divorce instead of a dissolution, we're talking about a process where the court becomes involved as necessary, and that can be to get a guardian ad litem for the children if the parties can't agree, or make good decisions about how the children will be best cared for. So the court could be involved in that process if the parties can't seem to manage it on their own. Okay. And the court strives for the same things, the best position for the children. A lot of times that revolves around the school district. So if one party's in the school district and one party is not, a lot of times the parent that's in the school district will have more time than the other parent. It's a convenience thing. It's a convenience thing for the children. So rather than have the children drive in an hour from the other party's house into the school district each morning, you may see more time set up with the parent that resides in the district.
Okay, so we're back to the standard that we both learned in law school, the best interests of the child.
Absolutely. It's just who determines it if the parties can't figure that out on their own.
Judge Kovacs of the world come in to sometimes make those decisions. I see. Well, I think you touched all around, did an excellent job, but just because I have it in front of me and I want to finish it before I start asking some other questions. We touched on divorce, we touched on dissolution. Academically speaking, could you explain the difference between the two? I mean, they're both going to terminate this contract of marriage.
Absolutely. While we said dissolution's the easier way to get there, the real catch with a dissolution is you have to agree. If you can't agree, you can't have one, no matter how badly you want one.
That was kind of my point. If you can't get people to agree, dissolution's not going to work.
Correct. Then you're going to have to go the divorce route, which is filing a complaint in the domestic relations court here, and that starts the process of discovering assets, where the attorneys that are involved try and guide their clients into positions where they're each receiving the things they need. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if they can't come to an agreement at the end of the case, our court is able to divide the property for them and set up what's going to happen with the children for them.
Well, apparently in this definition, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you just mentioned something. I practice a lot of criminal law and civil law. I mean, people sue people, we file a complaint, and then within 28 days there's an answer comes. That's a typical lawsuit.
Yes.
Is that what a divorce looks like? I mean, does somebody file a complaint for divorce and then the other spouse has the opportunity to answer?
Absolutely. Generally, the other spouse will then not only answer but file their own complaint, which in that case is called a counterclaim, so that both parties would be entitled potentially to a divorce in the end.
And obviously, under that scenario, the answering spouse obviously needs to go get his or her own attorney.
Absolutely.
To draft that document and follow it.
The law in Ohio does not require you to hire an attorney for divorce or anything like that, but it would be foolish to think that you can represent yourself against an attorney who's experienced in this area of law.
But back to the dissolution for a minute, though, Andrea. If the parties were agreeing, and well, you brought forth a real good point. You really always, a person really needs to know his legal rights.
Yes.
But if they're agreeing, it's a little bit different. There's not a complaint and an answer in a dissolution?
Correct, because ultimately what they do is they come up with an agreement together, and then they file the signed agreement with the court with something called a petition for dissolution, not a complaint.
Kind of like an agreed judgment, I mean, from the start.
Yes, that's essentially it.
I take it the two of the two, and this could play or it could have a role in it. The cost of a dissolution is probably considerably less than a divorce. Is that correct?
As a general rule, that's accurate, because you're fighting a lot less. There's not a bunch of court time involved in a dissolution, just the hearing as to whether or not the petition should be granted.
Okay, I'm going to throw a zinger at you, but you opened the door on it. So I mean, but I think it's a fair question. I know my viewers would be interested in hearing your answer. What is a guardian ad litem?
A guardian ad litem is, in our court system, an attorney that represents the children's interests in the case. So they work with mom and dad, and I say work with to the extent that's appropriate. Yeah. But they have a duty to the children to ensure that what needs to happen for the kids happens for the kids. So what they generally do is they'll interview the children. They will interview the children in each parent's household. They will look at both households. They will go to both households. They'll look at the child's school records. They will look at the child's medical records. And they will recommend to the court whether or not a parenting plan is in the children's best interest, or potentially, custody to one parent or the other parent, depending on what the circumstances are.
Well, the report of the guardian ad litem obviously is a pretty significant piece in the judge making his or her final decision.
Absolutely. It's the judge's eyes and ears to a big extent in the case. The guardian ad litem has special access that the attorneys don't have. The guardian ad litem meets with the children outside of the parent's presence, so that there's less concerns for undue influence and things like that.
So it's like the kids having their own attorney.
Absolutely.
But they can't afford that, Andrea. I mean, how do they?
The
a little
children
baby
don't
can't
pay.
get on the phone and.
Absolutely. When the parties can't make choices or are not in a position yet to make choices for their children, the court can appoint a guardian ad litem, or either party can say, "Court, we need some help to figure out what to do with this child. Would you appoint a guardian ad litem?" And that's when our court will assign a guardian ad litem to the matter.
Do the parties, the man and the woman that are in the process, do they pay for this? Or?
Absolutely. There's a deposit that's required in advance, and the guardian ad litem works, basically mom and dad generally both are required to deposit an equal amount, and the guardian ad litem works off that retainer, if you will. And when that's depleted, then they will have to subsidize the guardian's retainer again.
Well, thank you. That's a little bit of a bird walk from, what the questions, but I think it's
very important,
very important
in this
and
area
I think
of law.
It's not exactly a word that we all throw around at the dinner table, but guardian ad litem, if I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, is a lawyer appointed with all the credentials of a lawyer by the court who looks out for the best interest of the children.
Absolutely.
Has no allegiance to your client or the other?
None whatsoever, because that would not be their position in the case, and they shouldn't have an allegiance. Sometimes their interests, their belief for the best interests of the children align with one parent, but they don't represent the parent, they only represent the child.
Okay.
I would point out that in Medina County, our guardian ad litems are attorneys. Many of our guardians are seasoned family law practitioners, so they really are able to help the parents understand what the children are going to need based on actual experience.
So actually, with your credentials, you could be a guardian ad litem.
I have been a guardian ad litem, that's correct.
I see. That's interesting. Well, okay, thanks. I mean, that was really very interesting. All right, I'm going to shift gears a bit here. Spousal support and alimony. I don't know. Explain it. I'm always a little confused by it.
They're the same thing. Alimony is a rather antiquated term for spousal support. It is the duty of one spouse to support the other spouse after the marriage is terminated and during the period the marriage is being dissolved.
All right. So you're saying it's just mostly semantics? I mean, spousal support is the kind of the new word term for it, where alimony was the older one? Or?
Yeah, essentially.
But one way or the other, this is money that is going to go between the two parties, the husband and wife.
Correct.
It had nothing to do with supporting the children.
That is a separate issue, and that's dealt with solely by child support.
That's my next question. What is child support?
It's similar to what we've just talked about in that it's an exchange of money between the parties. Here in Medina, the exchange of money, and basically statewide, it's money from generally the higher wage earner to the lower wage earner, assuming the lower wage earner has the children, so that the children have an equal standard of living in both houses. The children have to have somewhere to live.
Yeah.
They have to have food and clothing and things like that. So it is designed to ensure that the children are supported in both households.
Does the judge have to take into consideration, like, let's say dad is an attorney and mom was either a stay-at-home mom or maybe only worked part-time? I mean, there's a great disparity in the incomes. Does the judge, how do you figure this out?
Well, first of all, we have to know who has the children, or primarily has the children. That's a starting point.
Yeah, makes sense.
The next thing is, though, that in Ohio, we have laws that determine how that's calculated. For example, in the worksheet most of us use, the father's income is put in one side, the mother's income is put in the other side. It calculates and therefore considers daycare expenses paid by one party or the other, the cost of health insurance, union dues, things like that. And after all of the formulas are applied, we have a program that tells us what the number is for child support.
So our lawmakers, the people who passed our laws, Andrea, actually, the law is that specific that you could, it sounds like you could buy software that you plug all this stuff in?
Yes. I would have to say every or almost every family attorney has child support software to calculate the software. We could do it longhand, but there would just be no reason for it. Yeah, but the
stuff that has to be addressed gets there by law. Child
Correct.
care.
We plug it in. We plug it into a formula, a program that spits out a number. That really just sometimes is the first step in the process, though. There are other considerations that have to be taken into account. Sometimes the parties share the child equally, and a full child support order may not be appropriate, and so we may have to deviate from that amount. Other considerations are if the children are in different households. It's not very common, but sometimes one parent has one child and the other parent has the other. So then the program changes how the support is awarded.
I could see where this area, probably about everything you talked about so far, but I mean, of this particular area, has got to be a hotbed for controversy.
Child support, while there's definitely some room for discussion in it, is probably the easier of the two between child support and spousal support.
Really?
Spousal support there's not a formula for it. We don't plug it into a computer. There's not a set in stone starting point. As a practitioner, we have rules of thumb. You're looking at somewhere near an equalization of income, but it's a very complicated process where we consider, are both parties employed to their capacity? Is one of the parties going to need money to rehabilitate themselves? Had they been out of the workforce for a number of years and now need to re-educate or retrain? So spousal support is going to take into account your actual income and the other side's actual income. It's going to take into account, whether you need services to earn a decent living, if you will. Who's getting child support? That's always factored into how much spousal support you're looking at.
Okay.
There are a number of factors that go into calculating or coming up with a spousal support award.
That's interesting. Well, at the end of the day, unlike common pleas court, though, there's no jury that makes the decision here, is there?
Absolutely not. You're not entitled to a jury in domestic relations court.
But there are trials there.
There are trials there.
So you have I'm sure you personally have made your case for your client before the judge, right?
Absolutely, to the extent you need to. In Medina County especially, you're looking at a divorce with children taking approximately 12 months. Judge Kovic is actually very good at keeping a case on track.
Really?
So you spend those 12 months, people say, well, why does it take 12 months? You spend those 12 months preparing for the end, which is either a fair agreement in the end or trial if you can't come to an agreement. So there is a trial that would be held in front of our judge here in Medina County or any county in front of a judge or magistrate if the parties are not able to reach an agreement during the course of that 12 months.
Now, you mentioned magistrate. That is, we actually had a magistrate on the show once. For lay terms, an assistant judge or somebody sits in place of the judge. Mm-hmm. But you would still make your case before the magistrate just like you would a judge?
Correct. It really depends what court you're in. Again, if you're talking about Medina County, our magistrates hear everything, just about everything until you get to the actual divorce. So our magistrates really act as the judge of the case until you get to the end.
And we have several magistrates, don't we?
We do. We have 3 magistrates that cover, all of the motion hearings for temporary orders, support, issues that arise, and then we also have a mediation magistrate that can, assist the parties in reaching an agreement with or without counsel.
Well, I don't practice there, but I go there periodically as I'm going through the courthouse, and I could tell you a pretty obvious observation, pretty busy place.
It is a very busy
place. People waiting in that big room out there. There's actually a deputy in there sort of directing traffic. Well, we're getting down to the line. It's, again, a controversial issue, but husbands and wives in the course of a marriage work towards buying a home, buying cars, property, even buy stuff for the kids.
Sure.
Okay, but at the end of the day, when this is over, dissolution of divorce, that stuff's going to have to be divided up.
Absolutely.
Well, in a few seconds, could you tell us how that happens?
The marital property, the things acquired during the term of the marriage, are generally split equally. There are some exceptions to that, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to cut in half all of the assets and all of the liabilities and give the parties half.
Wow.
I don't know how much time I have left, but you can, if one party takes the house and the equity, then the other party's going to be entitled to an equal amount of compensation on the other side.
And what the judge ultimately, in the end, in whatever agreement has to sign off this is equal as going to get.
The judge has to establish, it's her job to determine that it's fair, just, and equitable, that the parties have disclosed all of their assets and liabilities, not just the things they feel like disclosing.
An interesting topic. Andrea, thank you for being my guest today. In fact, I'd love to have you back.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure being here today.
It sounds like we just really scratched the surface here on
I could talk for hours if you could believe that.
It's very, very interesting. So again, I will close with the open invitation. You feel free to come back to Law Talk anytime, and we can continue this. I think my viewers will be very interested in this topic.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
At CZ Clip, we're devoted to the education of today's legal issues. Fueled by the public's keen interest in our legal system and current events, CZ Clip is dedicated to the educational venues aimed at enhancing the understanding by all citizens. For a complete listing of dates and times for this telecast, tune in to WCTV Channel 15 or log on to wadsworthcity.com and follow the links to WCTV.
I'm John Celebrezze. Please join me in getting a better understanding of the law.